Today I'll be talking about artificial intelligence, but I'll be talking about some of the real implications for disability management. But I'm going to start with a brief survey, just by a show of hands. I'd like to know how many of you consciously interact with artificial intelligence pretty much on a daily basis. So we're about a third, maybe a little lower, okay? How many of you work for an organization or study in an organization that has a well-defined policy on the use of artificial intelligence in your workplace or studies? A lot fewer, okay. How many of you use the internet just about every day? Okay, I've got participants from everyone. And that's probably true, but back in 1969, when the inception of the internet got going, there were only 2 users between the University of Southern California and another institute where they were transmitting the first messages. Since then, it's grown. And why is it growing? Well, because we started connecting those nets into an internet. And that's how we ended up in 1983 with what we now call the internet. But usage was still low, and it only improved as we added web browsers, things like Mosaic and Netscape Navigator, and there may be a few older people here who might remember that. But those were kind of like your Chrome and Safari today. And as we added more people to the network, we ended up with the World Wide Web at a point today where there are 5.4 billion users. And 5.4 billion users is basically 2/3 of the human population. And they're connected to the internet. And if you're an internet user, you're using artificial intelligence. So my purpose today is to hopefully demonstrate what AI can do and how it's revolutionizing disability management practices and processes. I'm going to give you a few ideas on how that might work in practice, but also in administration and education, because all of those things are being impacted by this technology. And I also want to hopefully improve your AI literacy as we work through this process together. And I'll touch on some of the ethical concerns, because each of you will have to make decisions about which tools to use and to justify those. And you need to have an understanding to make those decisions. And we're talking about about artificial intelligence at this conference here today because AI is in everything. It's everywhere, and it's happening all at once, or at least it seems that way. When I say it's in everything, I don't mean just the sophisticated stuff like perhaps airport security. It's in your searches that you do online, the recommendations you get from Netflix or Amazon. It's certainly available when you call into customer services. Quite often their scripts are being generated and guided by artificial intelligence. Even the new refrigerators that are being sold will recognize what food you've got in the fridge, offer you recipes and shopping lists, and maybe tell you when your fish is getting a little off. They're smart devices. And in the software that you're already using, whether it's Adobe Acrobat or whether it's any of the Microsoft products, you'll be seeing Copilot integrated into them. You'll see Google offering more and more access to its AI tool, Gemini, and in its workspace, things like composition prediction or assistance is already integrated. You can't really stop it. It's part of the new process. And that's happening with software all around the world and in all types. My granddaughter tells me, my granddaughter Niobe, she says she reads the terms of use for all the games that are on her computer. And you should be doing that for all of the software on your computer. Why? Because they are giving rights to using the the input that you give it and the input that you generate, or the output that comes from it, to train artificial intelligence. Some licenses, for Copilot for instance, offer free commercial data protection if you are signed up for certain enterprise licenses. But if you're using a different license or using the same software on your computer at home, that security is gone. So these are tough things that we have to get used to. And you're training artificial intelligence. Every time you make a comment on a discussion board or publish an article or post a video or make a comment about a silly cat video, all of those things count, and they're being used to train artificial intelligence. How many of you have seen one of these? This one shows a motorcycle, but it could be a bridge or a bus, and you have to identify which frames are there. Or maybe it's a collection of animals, and it'll ask you to identify the kangaroo. Or maybe it's some funny, blurry letters with a line through them, and you'll have to be able to decode what that says. Well, those are CAPTCHAs, and every time you solve them, you're advancing artificial intelligence. It's ironic, but every time you prove you're not a robot, you're making AI smarter. That's one of your contributions. Now, when I say it's in everything, it's happening everywhere, this is not a problem or an issue here in just North America. If you look around the world, you'll see every country is coming up with these national artificial intelligence strategies. And these are just documents that have come up since 2018. You'll notice Singapore is already on its version 2.0. And many of these documents contain statements like this. This one's from the Malaysian Artificial Intelligence Roadmap, and it's a principle for responsible AI that notes that AI technologies can become tools for the empowerment of people who are physically and cognitively disabled, enabling them to access opportunities in education, employment, and citizen services. Isn't that kind of what we do in terms of helping people? So clearly our goals are aligned with these principles. And we'll see stories like this. This is a Canadian woman by the name of Ann Johnson. 20 years ago, she suffered a stroke, a serious stroke, where she was paralyzed and cannot speak. But now, with the help of artificial intelligence decoding her brainwaves, she can generate speech and emotion through an avatar on a screen and talk to her husband. And we're seeing disruptions. Yeah, how many saw the picture of the Pope in a puffy coat? Artificial intelligence, it never happened. It's completely fake. But how many have read an article in a magazine that was written by an artificial intelligence? Sometimes it's not disclosed. In this magazine from Cosmos in Australia and Sports Illustrated in North America, they didn't necessarily tell people that that's what it was. So it's a big issue there. And if you type in concerns about artificial intelligence into any search engine, you're going to get a list of concerns. Businesses are freaking out. They're concerned about the costs and the implications. And there are fears. There are fears that are spurred on by articles like this one. AI may save us, or it may create viruses and kill us all. That was in the New York Times. So, this is fairly well read, so people are concerned about it. But a lot of that is hyperbole. In the real world, we are seeing legitimate fears and unions, for instance, acting upon them, whether it was the Writers Guild of America or the Screen Actors Guild, or it's the United Auto Workers. They've put artificial intelligence clauses in their agreements. They went on strike in order to make sure those things were covered. And workers at Google and Microsoft have also gone public to say, we're a little concerned that some of the stuff we're doing might be used for nefarious purposes, really affecting people in a negative way, because there's military applications and security concerns. Those are all legitimate concerns. And when I say it's happening all at once, I can attribute that to one event. And that was the release by OpenAI of ChatGPT. This is going to be hard to believe, but that was less than 2 years ago. And they were blown away by the uptake. There are now more than 250 million users of ChatGPT. But that spurred the other producers, Microsoft and Google and Facebook Meta and new companies like Anthropic, to put out their products. And those have gained tremendous use. As a matter of fact, you're now seeing lots of governments coming out and looking at how this should be regulated. The European Union published its act And the regulations came into force in August. So this is very recent. Universities are coming up with their policies and principles for how generative AI should be used, not just by students, but by faculty and administration and everyone else involved. Regulatory bodies like the National Academy or the National Association of Insurance Commissioners in the US came up with model guidelines for how AI should be used by the insurers of workers' compensation and disability. Those have now been adopted by 6 months, the last 6 months by 6 jurisdictions in the US. And that bulletin was only 6 months old when I actually did that count. It's probably greater now. But AI has been with us for a long time in one form or another. If you look back to the 1930s, machine learning techniques were being designed and implemented in a very mechanical way. In the 1960s, there was a real effort to do machine translation. If you're negotiating nuclear arms agreements, you want to make sure the Russian version and the English version have the same meaning. It's not great to be doing it by using a manual dictionary. You wanted to get meaning, not just translation. Whoops. And then what really got people's attention was in 2011, IBM's Watson computer competed against Ken Jennings, the champion on the game show Jeopardy, and beat Ken Jennings. And that made people begin to think that AI was a little closer than the science fiction might have indicated. And machine learning techniques are being used by organizations such as the Ohio Bureau of Workers' Compensation. As you know, workers' compensation agencies have these huge databases of administrative data. They're not great for doing research unless you can get them in a form that will help you. They used machine learning techniques to train a computer system to put this stuff in a form that they could use. They used a few thousand claims, and then the computer could look at 1.2 million claims. And then the data they could get from that was unique to Ohio and Ohio industries and Ohio injuries. And that meant they could find new ways, very much justified, to change the rules and the game to make these injuries less common. Prevention became a huge part of that. And then everything changed. When I was in high school, my teachers used to say, "Terry, pay attention." I was rather distracted. But it turns out attention is all you need, according to these 8 researchers from Google who published this paper in 2017. And by 2018, people had said, this is a great idea. And because of that, what they proposed, which were multiple self-attention transformer modules for artificial intelligence in large language models, was adopted by just about every chatbot or AI system you can see. These 4 account for 60 to 70% of the use, but here's a whole bunch of others that you probably have encountered or read about. And I've used most of these, but there are hundreds of them out there now. Now, I've said also all at once, I mean all. I mean, it's happening with text and pictures and audio and video, whether you have a spreadsheet or whole documents or large data sets, you can use these tools with those and between those modalities, partly because you trained them. It's the articles that you've published, it's the blogs you've posted, and it's the cat videos you've shared. And that brings me to Nico. This is my granddaughter's, Nora and Niobe's cat. And as you can see, you can see this picture. You have eyes, and we have a frame of reference. AI doesn't have that, but it's learned so that it can correctly identify a fluffy, long-haired cat wearing a cozy red and gray sweater with a festive design. It can say that there's a pet puzzle in front that's probably meant for animals. It's pets because it can see the footprint images on some of the buttons. And so that's pretty reasonable. Then it said something that really surprised me. It said, the cat appears to have a serious, slightly displeased expression rather than a happy one. And while it's difficult to interpret a cat's emotions, from facial expressions, it suggests it might not be thrilled about wearing a sweater in the current situation. Pretty insightful. That'll work with cats, by the way, but it won't work with people because that's blocked on all the AIs. Is the capability there? I would think so, but that's pretty insightful. But what's interesting here, and I said you could use the modalities interchangeably, here's a description that's similar in a different search engine or a different application. I used Copilot for this. Create a photo of a medium-haired tabby cat wearing a red and white Christmas-themed sweater while sitting on a wood-grained floor. It starts with a series of random dots and then uses diffusion models to resolve a picture. And you know what? It's not a bad picture. As a matter of fact, Nico is now happy because if you want a cat, if you want to see a picture of a cat wearing a sweater, get AI to generate it for you so she doesn't have to do it. But it doesn't have to be a cat. It could be a fuzzy gray image like this one. And if you look at this image, and with no other information, the ChatGPT could define what this image shows. It says, the X-ray image you provided appears to be a lateral view of an ankle. The key observation here is a bony outgrowth calcification located at the back of the heel bone, the calcaneus, which may indicate a condition known as a calcaneal spur. Right there on that screen. That's pretty good and pretty useful, and clearly it's something that maybe radiologists would use. The chat went on to give me more information about this type of injury. I had to prune my hedge, and I leaned the ladder against it, and I said, oh, I don't know, that looks a little steep. Is the ladder a safe angle? Well, I asked ChatGPT, and it said, no, it's too steep, and it should be at 75 degrees. I didn't have a protractor. But it said, you don't have a protractor, that's okay, here's a formula, and then gave me other links that I could go to. Not bad. So let me just give you some AI concepts, some basics for mostly for vocabulary. We all know that AI is part of computer science. It's only a small part, but I made it big in this image to get in machine learning and natural language processing as subsets of that general category. And the large language models that we're talking about and the generative AI capabilities fit within that and overlap. And that's the type of chatbots we're talking about. And most of us are familiar with this sort of thing, word prediction. As I'm typing away on my daughter's hand-me-down iPhone 8, this is, thank you very much, Brittany, you can see that every time I type something, it actually adds or predicts what the next word will be, and it will automatically complete it. And the context matters because each letter that I put forward or each word and punctuation that I add allows it to complete more and to predict how this should continue. And so it types along and it predicts, and if I always type that sentence in a text that I'm sending to a colleague to help me with my work, it knows the next sentence is going to be, please provide me an outline. It can predict or do composition in advance because it's used to me. It's collected that information because of artificial intelligence. But if I make the thing any more complex than that, or word prediction can't help me. But these generative pre-trained transformers, that's the GPT in ChatGPT that the Google guys thought would be, and girl, thought that it should be, fit here. The prompt that I'm giving is acted upon, and the processes allow it to generate an outcome. Now, there's a couple of key things here. First of all, it's not just the words you put in. The words are converted to tokens. The tokens are processed. They're ranked to see which ones are important, and they're matched by vectors to the information it's had in pre-training. I get that. And then you get the generated response. And all of that takes place in a context window that might be currently in the major ones that are for free, 13 pages long, 45 pages long, or up to about 1,200 pages of data. And when it does that, it can create really great output for you. And you're going to ask, what is it pre-trained on? And that matters. And it's different for just about, well, it is different for every product. Anthropic, it prides itself on its ethical choice of the software that it uses and reflecting human values. Gemini doesn't say that. Google says, we've got a lot of data, we've scanned a lot of stuff, we've got YouTube transcripts, we've got everything, and we can use it in a particular way. And they can also license additional material. Same with OpenAI. They say the same things, that they can use all of these materials. Most analysts believe they also just plainly scrape anything that's on a public website. Meta famously wanted to buy Simon & Schuster, the book publishers. Why? To have access to more data to train their AI. And that's what's going on out there. So let's see how we might use this in disability management practices. And to do that, I want to introduce you to Kendra Freeland-Lee. Now, Kendra Freeland-Lee is a former bank security guard of 20 years. She is 47 years old, suffering from PTSD, and advised to change occupations. And she's completely fictional, including that picture, which is AI generated. So I'm not breaking any confidentiality rules. But let's say I'm working on this case and I need a transferable skills analysis. I can ask ChatGPT to provide me one, and it does like that. And now I have an outline that is consistent with best practices in disability management. It has the normal information that I might want to put in, and it's grabbing information and inferring information from the data I've given it. And then goes on to talk about the skills and competencies, and it breaks them down into various categories and said, these are what the skills and competencies she already has from her job, based on what I know, being the computer, what I've been trained on about the role of a security guard in a bank who's worked there for 20 years. It then says you're going to want to note her achievements and her education. It then takes potential career paths, and it maps those skills, or it looks at those the various roles or jobs that they might have within that, and it then says, how can I show that these jobs are reasonable? And it maps her current skills to those career paths. Now, this is just the outline for my interview with Kendra, but look how much further it gets me in terms of my exploration. It then goes on to finish what a formal report might look like. Now, Kendra happens to work in a bank, has been there for a long time, and knows an individual who is a compliance officer who's retiring and says, that's a job I could do. I know nothing about what a compliance officer is, but ChatGPT has been trained on a whole bunch of jobs, so it can describe that job to me, and it can conclude, look, it looks like the compliance officer role is a viable option for Kendra Lee, given her strong foundational skills and the rest of the material you've done. And it says she's going to need some additional training and certification, but it's something that might be appropriate for her. And we go through that process and we decide it is appropriate, and Kendra says, look, why don't I write the HR director? I've worked on conferences with her, she knows I'm good and knows I can learn. Why don't I write her a memo requesting accommodation? She has a duty to accommodate, why not? So we can ask ChatGPT to give us a draft. And to draft that memo, based on the information that we've been talking about in this case, it says, okay, it's a draft and you're going to have to do some additional information, but it presents a 2-page letter, nicely formatted and business memo format, covering things such as transferable skills and relevant experience, her attention to detail, her risk assessment and management, her communication and training, her analytical skills, her documentation and reporting, and it says, look, I have a commitment to professional development. And then it puts in the ask, the request for accommodation. This isn't the letter I'd send, but it's a lot closer to getting to that letter. And that's kind of the point. The benefits from this example include the fact that you have a great starting point for your transferable skills analysis, that you have the ability to explore alternative jobs and improve your knowledge of those other jobs. You can also attach job descriptions to the discussion and let the computer do some of the analysis and the matching for you. You can facilitate the action, which is drafting this memorandum. So I think the benefits of higher quality interaction, faster research, and facilitated next steps are really the point in this particular case. Now, there are other cases. This is a real case this time, and this comes from the Australian Rehabilitation Providers Association. Their website has 7 really good case studies that not only lay out the problem, but what the member of their association did and what the outcome was. So in this case, I wanted to look at this multifaceted strategy for a worker with a foot and ankle injury. Now, the worker was a cellarman for a winery, unable to walk for more than 20 minutes, but they also had some other conditions: intellectual disability, a speech impediment, and depression. He also struggled with communications and lacked confidence in social settings. I basically pasted that into ChatGPT and I said, please provide a multifaceted strategy for returning this client to work. And it did like that. And these are screenshots, again, from Brittany's hand-me-down iPhone. And what they do are, these are 3 of about 5 screens it produced. It says the strategy should include a vocational assessment, skills training and development, job redesign, mental health and support, speech therapy, job coaching, and so forth. If one of my students in one of the courses I teach had provided this, I'd say, amazing, comprehensive, maybe a little overambitious, but wow, well done. It then the case now tells us what the interventions were. And I pasted those in and I said, please critique the ARPA involvement and comment on the outcome. And it did. Again, here's the 3 screens that it produced. It addresses the critique under the tailored approach, the research and employment, the addressing of personal challenges, the disability strategies, and then gives it kind of a glowing review, which makes sense. Let's face it, it was a positive case that they put forward, so it is as a success story. This is a little different. This is a published decision from the District Court in Wellington, New Zealand. And it's in Wellington, in New Zealand, they have something called the Accident Compensation Corporation. It's not work injuries, it's all types of injuries that might disable you from work. And they have a concept in that legislation about vocational independence. Does anybody have that in their law? I don't know what it is. I think I know what it might be. But I asked ChatGPT to anonymize this 14-page legalized decision into something I could understand, 250 words, with a decision and explaining the decision and the takeaway points for a person studying appeal decisions involving this concept. And it did like that. And here it is, 250 words. Something it's very much like something you'd read in a law review, with the results at the very end telling us what the important aspect was, how the decision turned in favor of the worker because the ACC didn't take enough care to look at certain factors. This is a semi-real thing. It's an anonymized MRI report from National Radiology website. It's a US company that does radiology, so it's their sample. But sometimes clients show up with medical information and no other context. And if you're going to discuss it with the person, just to put it in context, you might want to have a summary, maybe in 150 words, and maybe at a high school level rather than in the technical terms of a radiologist. You can ask that from ChatGPT, and it does that. It provides you with a very simple, straightforward statement about what these findings are and the key issues that these might have for the individual. You can also use it in policy analysis, in education and research. The minister mentioned the changes to the legislation in BC for the duty to cooperate and the duty to maintain employment. These were duties that were not in the Act a year ago. And when they were putting out the proposal, this 44-page document was put out to the public. I'm preparing a training course, and I want to put something in the syllabus directing people to this and telling them what it's going to have. So I can ask ChatGPT to give me a brief summary, 200 words that I could put in the syllabus, and also, while you're at it, tell me what some of the strong points and weak points are so I can anticipate some of the questions or criticisms that are going to come forward in the consultation. And it did. And that one took about that long, a little bit longer. I had read the document, and I could attest that it was a very accurate summary, better than I could have done with a half-day work. I was looking at post-traumatic stress disorder and some of the key determinants of successful outcomes for this particular disorder. I asked ChatGPT to recommend something beyond the normal medical literature. And it said, look, you might want to look at research institutes like the Institute for Work and Health, RAND, Workers' Compensation Research Institute, ISCAR, and NCCI. And I said, okay. And it suggested a couple of papers. I said, let's go through some of those and give me a sense of what are the 4 top things that are aligned from these research studies in terms of being determinants of success. The number one the recommendation was work-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. That's interesting. It's really hard to find cognitive behavioral therapists, let alone those that will do focused work in this area. But it gave me a couple of recommendations for to the sources that it got that information, so I could go read and confirm exactly what the study said. Now, there are other applications of artificial intelligence, including augmented treatment. And this looks like a chat, but it's not. This is part of proprietary software from Wobot, Wobot Health. It's only licensed to certain people, and it's usually under the care of a therapist. And what it is a chat that allows the user to type something in. And if the user says, look, my friend and I got into a big fight, and I'm really sad, and I'm angry, and I'm working on a problem, I want to work on this. The chatbot will use scripts that have been developed by cognitive behavioral therapists and interpersonal psychotherapists and dialectic behavioral therapists to guide the person through those problems, and will, even if necessary, refer that person back to their therapist, if need be, and alert the therapist, which is an amazing thing to happen. What the company finds is most of the people who are using it in the middle of the night. That's when they're really feeling it. And that's not when the normal therapists are available. So it's an interesting idea. Other AI applications are really amazing. You'll see a lot of these, and maybe even hear the word RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation. This is where the large language model is used to parse the question and make sure it formulates it correctly. But the answer is going to come from your policies, your manuals, your jurisprudence, your proprietary information, your historical records, whichever system whatever you're doing. Those are amazing powers that will help amplify the power of this technology. And my point here is that it doesn't matter where you are in the functional organization. If you're at the strategic apex, or the operating core, or the technostructure, or the support, or at the coalface where you're interacting with clients, or maybe you're in the advisory capacity and you're receiving this information, or the appeal structure, AI is going to be influencing what you do, and probably already is. AI is going to be applied to everything, everywhere, all at once. And every product you create, whether it's an internal policy, an external rule, a decision, a service contract, an audit, or an annual report, people are going to paste it into artificial intelligence and query it, ask questions, challenge you on what it says. And every product you receive, whether it's a proposal, a judicial reading, a contract, an external report, a directive, whatever, you are probably getting something that's already been run through artificial intelligence. And maybe you'll want to do the same. That's up to you. Now, are there cautions and concerns? Absolutely. The top 3 concerns I get when I talk to people about this are, the first one is, aren't you afraid of artificial general intelligence? Every product that I've talked about, every application I've talked about is actually artificial narrow intelligence. Artificial general intelligence may not even be possible, and it is a legitimate fear that we need to look at down the road, but it's not a reason to stop using or block the use of this for the benefit of the people we're trying to serve. Is there bias in the system? Well, humans are biased, and biases are in the material that they're trained on. Medical information is notoriously biased against females. It's got a male bias. That does not go away because you're using artificial intelligence. So just because you've used a very expensive system doesn't mean you've got rid of the bias. You need more judgment on it than that. And does it subject to hallucinations? Absolutely. And I tell my students, if you're going to use this, never cite an artificial intelligence source without actually going to the source. I had a question the other day that the colleagues and I were looking on, the compromise and release settlements in the United States workers' compensation system. You can go through the normal process or you can settle. Now, how do people fare? Do they get more money or less? How much less? How do you quantify it? I thought there must be a study on it. So I asked not ChatGPT, I asked another nameless chatbot to give me the answer, and it gave me a list of wonderful references. They were right on topic, and they were in current journals, and in a journal I actually read and was very sure I'd actually read that edition, but don't remember the subject, nor do I recognize the authors. And I thought I better go check this out. It gave me a link, but the link was to a completely different journal. And when I pulled up the edition of the journal cited, there's 2 articles there. They span those pages, but it's got nothing to do with that topic. AI, in that case, had given me exactly what I wanted. It had predicted what would be the right response, not that it was the right response. Now, this is real. This is a report that if you're a leader or an administrator, you probably need to read. It's not long. It's only about 15 pages long. And it's a collaboration between Microsoft and LinkedIn, and they looked at 30,000 knowledge workers, people like you and me, around the world, in about 30 countries. And they said, hey, are you using artificial intelligence? 75% of global knowledge workers are using AI at work. And they're not waiting for their companies to approve it. They're already using it. As a matter of fact, 80% of that number are bringing their own AI to work. They're doing the work on AI systems on their phone or on their laptop, not the company equipment. And that's a licensing and confidentiality issue. And half of the respondents were reluctant to admit that they're using ChatGPT for their most important tasks. This is a huge issue that needs to be dealt with. And I think we need to recognize this as the reality. I'm going to quote another report, it's about a year old, from IBM. IBM said that AI won't replace people, but people who use AI will replace people who don't. Let me generalize that for here. AI won't replace rehabilitation and return to work specialists, but rehabilitation specialists who use AI will replace rehab professionals who don't. And so my point here is that if you're an educator or a practitioner or an administrator or a leader, you've got stuff to do. Leaders, this needs to be an important priority, and you need to revisit it often. For administrators, you've got a tough job. Excluding AI from your work is not really an option. It's not going to happen. It's already not happening. And on top of that, you have to deal with the ethical and regulatory concerns, and you have to train people about that and why they need to be important. And that means you need to improve their AI literacy. Practitioners, you need this information to choose which AI items you use or which AI products that are the products of AI have come to you so you're familiar with what the problems might be and can then question it in the appropriate way. And educators and trainers, it's no longer suitable to say, you can't use AI in this assignment. It's already embedded in Word and Excel. It's already embedded in Google Workspace products. You have to acknowledge this and begin to train people how to use it and what it can do. I hope I've addressed my purposes today of showing you how AI is revolutioning and can revolutionize your business and what you do in your practices, but also in your oversight, your administration, and your education. And hopefully I've added to, not just to your concerns and maybe raised your awareness about some of the issues, but also your AI literacy so that you'll be able to consider these situations as we move forward. Thank you very much.